following presentation is going to familiarize you with the basic guidelines for assessing a subject's visual acuity according to the ETDRS protocol as modified for the age-related eye disease study, also known as ARIDS. For the purposes of this training, we will assume you have already identified and set up your visual acuity lane and you've completed your refraction. While some studies measure visual acuity at shorter distances, this video will focus on beginning all vision testing at a distance of 4 meters. All testing, whether distance or near, begins with the right eye, making certain that the fellow eye is adequately occluded. There are 3 sets of guidelines to consider when testing visual acuity. Guidelines for the subject, guidelines for the case report forms and the visual acuity worksheets, and general guidelines for the examiner. We will begin with the guidelines for the subject. When the exam begins, visual function examiners should give the subject the following instructions each time visual acuity is tested, as demonstrated by Lisa Coleman from the Ophthalmic Training and Certification Group at the EMIS Corporation.
Okay, Ms. Burt, I'm going to check your visual acuity now. I'd like you to look straight ahead at the visual acuity chart. Focus on the top left-hand corner of the chart. Read the letters from left to right. Please read the letters slowly, approximately 1 letter per second. This chart contains only letters, no numbers. Please read down as far as you can, and if you are uncertain of a letter, it's okay to guess. Please sit up straight and don't lean forward or backwards. You may begin.
N, C, K, Z, O, R, H, S, D.
Almost every study utilizes 3 separate and distinct charts: Chart R, Chart 1, and Chart 2. Chart R is used exclusively for the manifest refraction of both eyes. Chart 1 is used exclusively for assessing the visual acuity of the right eye, and Chart 2 for assessing the visual acuity of the left eye. As important as it is for examiners to know how to correctly administer the visual acuity exam, it is just as important for them to know how to correctly complete the case report form or visual acuity worksheet that corresponds to Charts 1 and 2. Most studies require examiners to circle the individual letters a subject reads correctly on the case report form and visual acuity worksheet, leaving the letters read incorrectly or not at all unmarked in any fashion. Since the examiners will be busy circling the letters a subject reads correctly on the CRF worksheet, it is important to encourage subjects to read slowly, approximately 1 letter per second.
D, O, V, H, R, C,
Ms. Burt,
Z.
please slow down. Remember, approximately 1 letter per second. Please continue.
R, H, S, O, N.
After auditing numerous case report forms and visual acuity worksheets, we have noted that there are 2 frequently made errors. The first is miscounting the number of letters read correctly on each line of the visual acuity chart and circled on the CRF worksheet. And the second is incorrectly summing up the total visual acuity score. The total visual acuity score is the sum of letters read correctly at 4 meters plus 30 letters if the subject reads 20 or more letters at the 4-meter distance. When a subject is unable to read at least 20 letters with either eye correctly at the 4-meter distance, that eye must then be tested at the 1-meter distance. The total visual acuity score is derived by adding the number of letters read correctly at 4 meters to the number of letters read correctly at 1 meter. Now that the guidelines for the CRF worksheet are clear, let's discuss some other rules that are important for examiners to keep in mind when employing this protocol for measuring a subject's visual acuity. It is okay for examiners to remind the subject that there are no numbers on the chart, only letters.
R,
If a subject does read a number instead of a letter, the examiner should stop them immediately. Remind them that there are no numbers and allow the subject to guess which letter they believe they see.
R, C, Z, R, H, 5.
Excuse me, Miss Burt. Remember, there are only letters on this chart, no numbers. Which letter do you think that is?
S,
Okay, you may continue.
O, N, H,
Subjects
R,
do have the opportunity to correct themselves if they make a mistake, but they must correct themselves before reading the next letter in the sequence.
N, C, K, Z, O, R, H, S, O. Oh no, that's a D.
The examiner can then score that letter as having been read correctly. Subjects who make an error but correct themselves after reading the next letter in the sequence cannot be given credit for that particular letter.
H, S, O, K. Oh no, wait a minute. That's not an O, that's a D.
Okay, keep going.
D, O, V, H, R, C,
And if the subject can't make up their mind, encourage them to choose a letter.
O, N, H. I'm not sure if that's a K or an R.
Now, go ahead and guess. Which letter do you think that is?
I think it's an R.
Okay.
C, D, K.
Examiners should periodically check the subject to be certain they are not leaning forward or doing anything else that would allow them to gain some visual advantage while reading the chart.
C, S, O, K,
Miss Burt, please sit up straight. Thank you. You may continue.
N, C, K, D, N.
Examiners must refrain from pointing to a specific letter or line on the chart. If the subject becomes disoriented or the examination is interrupted, examiners should use the two parallel lines, the single straight lines, or bent lines to reorient patients to the last line they read. We need to keep in mind that the different charts have different roles. Charts R, 1, and 2 all serve a different purpose. Chart R is normally used only for a manifest refraction. The exception at this time is in the Accord study, where Chart R is being used to measure the visual acuity in both the right and left eye. No manifest refraction is being done in the Accord study. By the time the subject gets to either Chart 1 or Chart 2, it is assumed the subject has been refracted or is now using a correction that will allow for a best corrected measurement. Some subjects may have eyes that are compromised by disease. With these subjects, it is acceptable for examiners to allow them to view the charts eccentrically or shake their head. This may allow the subject to utilize a more viable portion of the retina, perhaps permitting them to read more letters. In these situations, it is important that the examiner be certain that the fellow eye is sufficiently occluded.
C, D, K, S, N, V.
Miss Burt, please keep that left eye covered. It's okay to turn your head, but please keep that eye covered. You may continue.
Z, S, O, K, N, C, K, D.
As previously mentioned, visual acuity measurement for all eyes and in all the studies we are discussing begins at 4 meters. However, those eyes that have been compromised by disease may need to be tested at a closer distance. For all studies, this is a 1 meter distance. Vision testing at 1 meter is necessary only when the subject reads fewer than 20 letters correctly at the 4 meter distance. Examiners must remember to add plus 0.75 to the distance correction before testing at the 1 meter distance. In addition, both eyes should be tested at 4 meters before moving the subject to 1 meter. It is particularly important for examiners to keep watching the subject when being tested at 1 meter. A slight amount of adjustment in the subject's posture can make a significant difference at the 1 meter distance.
Z, R H S
Miss Burt, please sit back. Thank you. You may continue.
O N A.
Keep in mind, at 4 meters, it is less significant, but should be monitored carefully. And when it becomes evident that no further meaningful readings can be made by the subject, despite the examiner's best effort to get the subject to guess, the visual acuity testing for that eye is now finished.